Today, on this episode of The Cave and the Fire,
There's an aggression that is not violent, like a non-violent aggression, a boldness, a purpose, maybe mission.
I get to spend time with Matthew Lyda.
I would go right to the penis. There is a symbol of sacred masculinity, not the penis that harms others. It would be pseudo masculinity. That would be domination power. But I would say, like, in the phallic, right? In the penis, there is this age-old symbol of, well, erection, of strength, of sturdiness, pointedness, of generativity.
Matthew is an author, poet, and guide. You can find his work at recoverthewild.com.
Find a group of men, beautiful, generative, loving men that are outrageously empathic and that can put themselves in other people's shoes, especially who can put themselves in other people's shoes who look different than them, sound different than them, different gender than them. Run like hell, right? Run like hell from any group of men that can put themselves in other people's shoes.
Today we get to talk about sacred masculinity and about Illuman, the global community of men he's discovered, and I as well, in the midst of his journey. And he gives some advice to younger men who are looking to sort out life's big questions in a space that is formed by the great wisdom and spiritual traditions of the world. Join me. I think you'll really enjoy it.
Well, today I get to hang out with somebody who I've really grown to love and just delight in. A beautiful, wild soul, Matthew Lyda. Matthew, thank you for taking some time to hang out together.
Thanks for having me, Ned.
You know, you are a young man within Illuman. How old are you, by the way?
How old do you think I am?
36.
Ooh, 39.
39. Oh,
Yeah, baby.
that's good. You got a young, in the best of ways, like a young energy about you.
Mm.
And so Illuman has been a place where you and I have been kind of the context we've gotten to know each other a little bit. And I wanted to know just how is it that you even found your way into Illuman? What did that look like?
Yeah, so it was a real beginning part of my life where I had a few dreams had fallen apart. Family dreams, work dreams, ways that I really understood myself or how the world works had really fallen through. And I was actually a part of I guess you could call it a men's cohort that was meeting every season up in Pennsylvania. And in those gatherings, I was really reintroduced to the potency of spending time in solitude with nature, with creation, and re-exposed to the power of drumming with a circle of men. And again, reminded of the power of poetry and how all those things really connected to my story. That's why I say reminded or re-exposed, because those things have been in my story, and I just left them behind after, as I had grown up. And so at that experience of walking for about a year with this group of men, a few of them mentioned this men's rites of passage weekend they were doing. And yeah, I was just being fed so much by that men's group that I knew that rites of passage was the next step for me. And so in 2018, I did my rites of passage at Pilgrim Park, Illinois.
Uh-huh. And what were you, I know there's probably two stories going on. At least one is what you were anticipating, and then there's what actually happened, and then what unfolded after the MROP, which is, and I'm always kind of curious that sometimes the contrast between what you might have thought you were getting into,
Yeah.
and then how did it actually end up intersecting you and opening you into your own life story in a different way.
Woo. Yeah. Oh man. Let's see. So, what I was hoping for, Ned, was really to recover a deeper connection to my body, like healing, like a disconnection from my body, healing trauma, perhaps grieving in ways that I didn't even know I needed to grieve. I think at that point, when I went into the rites, I had enough of awareness of that I was carrying grief. Some of it I knew I had, and then some of it I just had this understanding that there was a grief that was mysterious to me. I didn't know what it was. So I went into the rites hoping to work with all that. I was also coming up out of compulsions and addictions of various sizes. And so I was really interested in deepening that recovery work, and in a way that, I could be like a more, what's the word, alive presence to my family, and a more maybe grounded, patient, committed presence to my family, my children included, my wife included. And so, I came with a big wanter. I wanted a lot going into the rites. I was at a point where I was pretty desperate to learn how to be a man who is, well, wild, but also does no harm at the same time. And so those were some of my expectations. Oh my gosh. And what happened? Wow. Yeah, what's the best way to say it? I was surprised. I was met by so many strong, fierce, wise, beautiful men, a diversity of them that were similar to me in some ways and completely different in other ways. And and so one thing that really lit me up out there was I did do some important grieving. Really cleared the pipes of some pain and some sorrow that I was carrying. And Ned, some of it I knew I needed to grieve while I was out there. And there was something really potent about doing that in community. And some of it surprised me. For example, I heard myself begin to grieve the distance I had with mainly my maternal grandfather. And that completely came out of left field. I did not see that coming. It wasn't planned. And I just heard myself speak it out loud while I was there. And it opened a whole nother portal to explore. And it was actually like a preemptive grief, and maybe even healing, because maybe 2 or 3 months after the rites, that grandfather died. And so I see that as just impeccable timing, something I couldn't have arranged or figured out or contrived. And that's something that's still in that relationship with that grandfather is, I don't know if this is hyperbole, but it is healed. It is now a source of strength And so that's a big deal to me. That is something I didn't see coming out there. Yeah, I could go on, but that's
Oh,
that's
so
some,
wonderful. I'm so grateful for your own awareness. It's so rare for men, young men at least, to be aware that there's a level of grief within them. I know certainly when I was I went through the men's rites of passage when I was, I think, about 33. And I went in with like no grief at all. And grief didn't end up playing a huge part of my experience, but it did it. And actually, the funny thing is, it's kind of ridiculous, is I was like, man, I really don't have much. This isn't really a place I need to do a lot of work. And in the realm of grief, I was still in the middle of kind of climbing my ladder and ascending, and everything seemed to be in order. And then, of course, right after my experience, life kind of started to fall apart, as you know,
Mhm.
with my health. But it is, and then, of course, like as you said, once we start to open ourselves to grief, then it's like all the ungrieved parts of our own stories and our family stories, and even things from the wider world that we've never
Mhm.
really been open to grieving. They take
Yeah,
advantage of our openness, and they're like,
yeah,
"Hey, I'm gonna. This is my chance to, have somebody voice the grief around whatever it is."
yes.
But I'm so grateful for your awareness at a relatively young age of knowing this. I wonder, that just didn't seem on my side of the country. I mean, I grew up on the West Coast, you're on the East Coast. Is that something that you feel like is like for men in your communities, young men? Is there awareness of grief and of pain that is, or is it something that is kind of silent and unconscious?
Yeah, I think it's like Bill Plotkin says that we're all sitting on mountains of grief, and I think a good bit of it is probably unacknowledged. I think I think a good bit of it is probably expressed in busyness and moving really quick and you know hustle culture. Because if I pause and really slow and unplug for a good amount of time, it could bubble up. And yeah, and one thing that was really surprising to me as well with I think it's Martin Prechtel who says that the other side of grief is praise. Like if it's a coin, one side is grief, the other side is praise. And that was also the experience as well. Like it was like full spectrum, Ned, just like here I am weeping, you know, important, like essential tears that need to be wept if I'm going to live whole. And then on the other side of the spectrum, just these moments of praise, of that's the best word, of maybe ecstasy, maybe, yeah. And so like catharsis, right? The becoming, and also, yeah, the ecstatic, like the beyond, all of that. And yeah, and I'll just say one more thing here and in that it was this belonging in this group of men that I don't think we even found out, what we were doing for our jobs really. It didn't really matter. None of that really mattered. It's just about being together, going deeper together, helping one another heal. And, and yeah, so yeah, that like belonging, becoming, and beyond. That's that is like the skeleton structure of what the divinity lab at Harvard calls like religion at its best, is that communitas, ecstasy, and then, yeah, the catharsis, the healing.
there's a lot of, I want to touch about on spirituality for a minute, and maybe as it intersects your life, as it intersects kind of men in general, and maybe your experience within Illumin. I mean, I know that in my experience of Illuminati, there's Buddhists and there's Jews and there's Muslims and there's Christians and there's people who are kind of a lot of people who are ex-Christian and ex or post-Christian and post. I know a buddy of mine who's a kind of who maybe say he's post-Muslim, and there's something. So there's this variety of religious traditions, even though maybe the majority of the men, at least in some parts, I guess it even depends on what part of the country you're in, but there's still probably a preponderance, given our Franciscan roots, of men who are from the Christian tradition. But there's grief work done in a lot of contexts, and we need a lot more of them. God knows. There's something about that is unique to kind of the spiritual ethos of Illumin. I wonder if you were able to put your thumb on it at all and articulate some of that. Where were you before, and how has it shaped your own kind of spiritual journey? And, in the last number, since you kind of started hanging out in the Illumin circles.
I was in this place where a good bit of my faith that I had grown up with felt like it was in this decomposition phase. And I grew up Southern Baptist. I served as a youth pastor in my former life. Yeah, I served overseas with an agency of doing good. And I was at this unraveling of like wanting to articulate a faith that I could sign my name to. And that, again, did no harm. And so in that group, of that movement of Illumin, I found a space where being able to say and articulate just so the right theological truths or whatever beliefs wasn't as majored on as, I would say, in my experience, like living it and maybe even experiencing it or embodying it. And so the way I described to some of my friends my experience with, say, Men's Rites of Passage was like I saw and I experienced, for example, the Beatitudes of Jesus, like really fleshed out. Like, blessed are the poor in spirit. So there's the grief. Blessed are those who hunger and thirst, for wholeness, for righteousness. I saw that. I was participating in this, like, this hunger, this thirst, this communal thirst for integrity and living as men who do good in the world. Blessed are the peacemakers. That's another one. Like men coming together across maybe religious divides or sexual orientation or geography or race. And so, yeah, I experienced that. I tasted that firsthand. And that was really what my life had turned towards, was like embodying and living a life of love. And really letting go of like the God of saying things right, or getting things like just so religiously. And so, Illumin is this a community where men can enter from like different doors, like you were mentioning, maybe you're Muslim, or maybe you're Jew, or maybe you're atheist or Buddhist or Hindu. And it's been this beautiful place where we come together, or maybe you're on one of the billions of, group versions of the Christian experiment, right? It's been like this place where we can come together, learn from one another, and like make direct contact with life, with the great mystery. And then each man is free to like frame that however he needs to. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I always think that some people ask me about being in interfaith spaces, which, I did not grow up that. I grew up in a, well, I'm not sure that my first 16 years would be even considered Christian, but eventually but we thought we were. But still within I'd still say cosmologically kind of Christian, and being in it, but really not with lots of connection to people from other faith traditions. And I've certainly found it for myself, and I think I've found this with some of my dearest friends in Illuman who are, from some of these other parts of other great faiths, that I'm a far better Christian because of my deep encounters with men who are after God's heart, but doing it from a Jewish perspective, and some of my buddies who were, Buddhist, I think they would say they're better Buddhists because they've been around whole integrating men who are Christian, and that to me has, and as our world has gotten smaller, and our kids, my kids have grown up in a totally different context. I think there has to be a great hope for the world that like there's an ability to both maintain, the particularities of our faith traditions and even deepen them, while also being astonished, learning, like at least, and amazed at the presence of the friend, if I could just use that language, I guess, in all these other amazing and beautiful people and their journeys as well. I'm curious to know just a little bit about masculinity and how it's such sometimes a fraught topic these days, and it seems like after, if I was to trace back, the US, we kind of went through a John Wayne, the myth of the loner, the individual kind of hero, but who was pro-social often, right? He was at least in its attempt, it was still trying to kind of do something for the good of the world, to protect community, to, whatever it was that character was doing, like the cowboy in the white hat or the GI in World War II, And then we've had, all kinds of conversations, some helpful, some not so helpful, about gender and masculinity. And now we're in a place where a lot of our role models on the right are kind of reverting back to a pre-John Wayne, where it's might is right, kind of, it's all about winning, kind of the Gordon Gekko, I guess we would have seen it in the 80s. And then on the left, we don't also see a lot of, it's like a complete disease with even talking about, masculinity in any kind of positive or healthy or generative way. It's still a lot of questioning it, and I know a lot of men who probably are in a place of defendedness, and understandably so, around in their communities because of they're in male bodies. And, it's a fraught time, right? There's lots of ways of teasing that out. I wonder what you're aware of in this conversation right now. What's like stirring for you in the conversations on gender and masculinity?
Yeah, so I have this picture of me. I think I am 1 year old, and I'm in a karate gi with a headband, and so yeah, from a young age, apparently I was ready to kick some ass, and I have this other memory of being 5 years old and walking through the Westgate Mall with a Ghostbusters proton pack on, and with a styrofoam like swirly thing that would come out of the proton blaster, and just having a blast. Also of like playing battle in all sorts of ways, whether it was Legos or GI Joes. Yeah, I have that right in my story, and even if I'm gonna like move that towards athletics, I spent a good bit of time out on the baseball diamond, and so this very, just competitive and active and go hard sort of way of being brought up. And where I am today, I see that as I incorporate that into a healthy, maybe fully dimensional masculinity. I'm not blasting anybody with proton packs, and I'm not promoting, violence, in this sort of way. But, we could speak of the warrior archetype that is this part of masculinity and is to be retooled, to not do physical violence or harm to anyone, but to be of service, to fight for what matters in a way that, yeah, includes the poor and includes, those who may be, I don't know, left out. And so I guess what I'm saying here, Ned, is my journey with masculinity has been like incorporating an aggression that is not violent, like a non-violent aggression. And what I mean by aggression is like a boldness, like a maybe purpose, maybe mission. Those are some other words that I would use for it. Like that we would see maybe in some of the older, you're mentioning John Wayne and all this, like we'd see like glimpses of it, but it was, it was off, right? It was like battling indigenous people, no, right? Not that, but it's, I guess since we've brought in some gospel here, it's like the old story of Jesus going in the temple and throwing over some tables, saying, this is not right. And everybody belongs. Everybody, gets opportunity here. And so, yeah, I see that as part of my like masculine journey. And this was really a gift of Illuman and other ways too, but also incorporating like with that, like the warrior, like the peaceful warrior, perhaps. I know that's a book title, but incorporating with that, like this lover, like this innate one who is just amused by the American robin outside my cabin. And was, as I was walking my Chiweenie dog here, Cole, this morning, stopped and put my nose into the blossom of a peach tree. And so there's a softness there as well that will embrace my children, right? That we'll take time to like appreciate what it is to be alive on like this wild uh, blue dot. You know, I could say more, but it's like, because there's more that could be said about like archetypes of masculinity. And I also want to say, you know, that's not like the exclusive domain, right, of male identified people. You know, speak from my experience and knowing like this is part of me growing up as a boy. And I think what you're saying is, yeah, maybe we go off the rails when we over identify with either one of those, perhaps. Right. It was I think our mutual mentor, Belden Lane, I remember him talking about masculinity as being a prickly pear cactus. And so there is a sturdiness, maybe a pointedness, maybe a, I don't know, we could say boundaried, perhaps. But there's also the softness of the skin, right? And like that inner layer, like a softness that goes together. So, yeah, my masculine journey has been incorporating those many other archetypes, but incorporating lover and warrior for sure.
And I mean, right now, I think young men coming up behind you, that's just, you know, there's research that's just showing that I want to say like 43% of men under third and maybe like 35 and under don't really even know. They feel rather confused about the notion of what masculinity it is, you know. What, how, you know, you work with a lot of men in your professional capacity. What wisdom do you offer to young men kind of trying to navigate masculinity in today's world?
Yeah, one, it's nothing to be ashamed of. Two, it is a true gift that is meant to be for the good of all. With, yeah, like no one left out. So it does come in our culture with perhaps a bit of privilege. And so there is a responsibility of being the kind of person that women would not be afraid of to meet in the woods. Right? I think you may have heard that study, right? That some women would rather meet a bear in the woods, alone in the woods, than a man. And so it's about letting life defeat us in a certain kind of way, right? That we are not in control, that we are going to die, that life is not all about us, right? That we are not that important. And I might be missing one here. And life is hard. And just letting those truths defeat you in a certain way. And this is an old like mythic pattern, right? Like defeat as a way that we don't want to go. We don't want to go there, right? We're in a winning culture. We win. You know, we want to win. And so I would say to young men, allow life in a sense to defeat you. Life is hard. There's no escaping it, right? You are going to die. There's no escaping it. And then maybe coming up out of that eventually into a like the mythic like descent and then perhaps resurrection into like having been defeated. And it's like the old initiation rites, right? Like being led to places where we're not in control and, you know, we can't figure our way out. And then coming back even stronger. Like coming back even stronger, affirmed by elders, affirmed by the community in a way that we are now a force of good, of wild, authentic, exuberant good for whoever's in, a 3-foot diameter of us. And yeah, instead of maybe spilling out our own grief or our own undealt with story or our own addictions onto the people and the places, right? Let's be honest about our ecosystems and, our lands and our waters. Instead of spilling that out on those around us in harmful ways, we've encountered death, we've encountered defeat, we've learned from pain, we've learned from suffering. We get back up off the mat and we come back in a way that's maybe softer than before, and also maybe tougher than before. Men that women would be unafraid of to meet in the woods. And so I would say to young men that, well, I don't get any money here, I don't think, Ned, from Illuman, but I would say get in a men's group and do this work of undoing disorder and coming up the other side into perhaps a new life, right? Like being twice born, like born as a new man or triple born, I don't know, however many times. But yeah, the first time you didn't get to decide. First time you didn't get to decide who you're born to, where you were born, right? But now you do. So find a way to opt in to this, like a way to say yes to reality, to loving others, to owning your story up to this point. Find a group of men, beautiful, generative, loving men. And here's one that are outrageously empathic. Yeah, that can put themselves in other people's shoes. Especially who can put themselves in other people's shoes who look different than them, sound different than them, different gender than them. Run like hell, right? Run like hell from any group of men that can't put themselves in other people's shoes. Especially those of maybe lower economic tax brackets. They can't, empathize. How's that sound, Ned?
Yeah, beautiful, beautiful. There's this phrase that's been thrown around. It's not a new phrase, but I hear it. It seems like it's bubbling up again, of the sacred masculine. And I'm wondering, what does that mean to you, if anything? What when we combine those two words, the sacred and the masculine? What's this notion, this deep notion of the sacred masculine? What comes up for you with that?
Yeah, the first thing I would say about it is there's also the sacred feminine, right? And so to say that there's a sacred masculine doesn't eclipse, right, or substitute the beauty and the holiness of the feminine. And the sacred masculine can be present in those that are not male, just like a sacred feminine can be present in the male, though it typically, right, Ned, is displayed in perhaps male identified people. I would go right to the penis, Ned. Go right to the penis and say, there is a symbol. There is a symbol of sacred masculinity. And I'm not talking about the penis that is used in a way that harms others, right? That would be the misuse. That would be the pseudo masculinity, right? That would be domination power, right? The phallic organ that's misused, right? That is not faithful. That perhaps is the guiding force of a man. But I would say, like, in the phallic, right? In the penis, there is like this age old symbol of, well, erection, right? Of strength, of sturdiness, pointedness, a, a possibility of generativity, of seed, of life-giving, seed-giving reality, right? That's, yeah, I wouldn't be here without semen. I wouldn't be here without seed. I wouldn't be here, right? Without my dad's penis and the love, that like the consensual love between, right, the ones that made me. And so that's the sacred masculine. It's this potential and ability to give life. All right. Seed. For seed, and I'll go agricultural a metaphor now, right? And back to perhaps a gospel parable, like a seed that is cast and can produce fruit. Yeah. Yeah. And so it's this pointedness, right? And we see it in some of our best stories, right? It's the sword. There's the phallic sword. But this is symbolic and not doing literal violence, but being a blade or a tool for like cutting through the bullshit, like being a blade or like a weapon for like cutting through denial or like cutting through apathy or maybe cutting through racism or like cutting through anthropomorphic thinking, right? Like it's all about humans, you know, cutting through that bullshit. We see it in like the mythic, like Gandalf's staff. There it is, the phallic, right? Is this, and I'm moving into more of like a magician kind of archetype of sacred masculinity, but it's this instrument that has use and can do good in the world. We could talk about, yeah, like a king's scepter. There it is, the phallic, straight, hard, and can be misused. And we've seen it misused, right? And there's why there is the right and good suspicion of masculinity, right? Because we've seen the king's scepter be misused so often. But in its beauty and in its gift to the world, it can be like this authority that orders and loves and benefits everyone. So I think his name is Eugene Monick. Hopefully I'm getting it right, but he wrote this book on some of what I'm saying here, and he says,
yeah,
I'm just gonna kind of make up a quote that might be something of him, but it's like the sacred masculine at his best is a battering ram. But it's one in a way, and now I'll freestyle with that. It's one in a way that is like a battering ram of empathy, of an intense compassion, of like maybe an aggressive service, like an aggressive life-givingness. And so what I'm doing is I'm bringing together like old outdated ways of like violence, but like trying to hold on to like some of what it was pointing to. And it's this way of being in the world that is very bold, right? That's one of my teachers, he calls it needless. Like I am not depending on my partner to tell me who I am. I am not depending on so and so in whatever title or authority to tell me who I am. I am like within me. I am rooted. I am stable, and and I'm ready to give. I'm ready to, it doesn't cancel out interdependence, right? But I think the sacred masculinity is like this stability. It's like rooted. I'm not needing you to take care of me, right? To walk on eggshells around me. I know who I am, and I know what I've come here to do, and I'm doing it. I'm here to do it. Yeah.
Beautiful. Yeah, I'm so struck by a couple images. One of, you mentioned Gandalf, and whenever I think of Gandalf and his staff, and the kind of the boundary keeping that can be, obviously can be king energy, but could also be warrior or lover or magician. And in that case, he's kind of, when he's puts it down, it's like,
Yes.
you shall not pass. Like, this will not go farther, you know. It's just something beautiful about such a strong and healthy no. But I'm also curious too about, so often we see the kind of the phallus as the symbol of masculinity when it's erect. But you mentioned Belden and the kind of the prickly pear. And I wonder if there's something about sacred masculinity, because most of the time we live in a period, at least physiologically, of where we're flaccid, you know, and you know, erection is actually a pretty small amount of percentage of time for men, right? And so there's something about then you know, the flaccid penis.
Yeah.
There's a tenderness, there's a weakness, even it's full of potential, but it doesn't have to live in this inflated place all the time. And there's something about masculinity that knows when to be flaccid and knows when to be hard. And I kind of appreciate that sense of knowing, like the prickly pear, there's a pointedness and there's a tenderness and there's the capacity to move from both and hold both in the same moment. And I think it's because of, if we're going to talk Lord of the Rings, you know, like Aragorn, it's because he has both.
Yeah.
The capacity to play and delight and joke around. He's not always just a hard ass, you know, pusher. No, he can move into play and delight and song. That's what it's, having both side, and sometimes almost in from one moment to the next, you know. And you see that with Gandalf too, you know, the way he plays and delights in the twinkle in his eyes. I think that there's something about the capacity to hold both that is essential to our humanity and essential to
really have it there with
what it means to embody the
you know, I like
masculine.
to say the thrust, right? That's perhaps the boldness, and then the trust. That's the softness. That's it doesn't have to be one or the other, but you know, like the action, like more active, and then the contemplation, like the softer still that we often live in. And yeah, that both belong and both are part of the sacred masculine. And it's like, I don't know, like the sun, right? If we're thinking of more symbols, like the sun, you know, like the heat and the fire, and then the moon, like the soft waxing and waning. And I think that is probably one of the simplest ways of like pointing towards a divine sacred masculine energy, is being able to have that potency, that boldness, and that softness. And neither one has to win. And maybe they're happening at the same time, you know. And I certainly have seen that kind of energy in Illuman, right? Where there's this intensity. I've been challenged, right? I've been challenged in some intense ways that I needed to be challenged, like brought to my edge. And then, well, you know, just hugging another man and just embracing another man, and the affection, like affection that we have for one another, that we've had for one another, and hugging and sharing, you know, the softness and the vulnerability of our emotions, right? Like, hey, I'm really struggling here. You know, that's soft, like being willing to like receive care, like the receptive. It's part of that dance.
Within Illumin, I mean, we have these 5 different touchstones, and one of them has to do with, the fifth one has to do with service. And kind of, any healthy human is not living, a life for himself or herself alone, but they're living on behalf of something bigger. And certainly for men, that's got to be the case. These energies have to be used for a purpose larger than their own small story. And there's something important about service always beginning in solidarity with those who are suffering. Whenever we kind of set out with seemingly good intentions to serve others, it just can become another egoic identity project. We're not really, our intentions are pretty mixed. And we can recreate, systems of power, and that is, the very thing that we're really needing to undermine. But solidarity kind of levels the playing field, and it recognizes our common life that we share. It's a place of union, of communion, and out of that right action can flow that looks like a service, that looks like love. And I appreciate what you said, that a man is somebody who, first has to know who he is. There is an essential part of somebody as they embark in this. We can do that without knowing who we are, but it helps. And sometimes doing these things without knowing, we'll discover who we are along the way. But knowing our identity it helps, right? It helps. And I'm just curious to know, like up in the Pacific Northwest, they like to say that they're awakening men to their belovedness, that they might love the world, which I just love that. And I'm curious to know for you, I know you give and you give to your kids, you give to your wife, you give to the men that you serve professionally.
Yeah.
But
in terms of solidarity,
what's alive for you right now as you kind of reflect on your impact on the world?
I am of this place. I am an expression of life, and I belong to this place. And so I am in solidarity with, all of the other expressions of life, right? The children at the school, or the pecan tree right here, or, anything like, in a deep truth, like we are one another. And as I reflect on my service to men or to the world, it's for those, which is all of us in a certain way, have been domesticated by maybe the plastic, or the predictable, or the clickable, or the fluorescent, and really moving towards a re-authenticity, a rewilding of like connected here in this world, right? To this place. For men who, and this is all of us as well, in one way or another, who have had our empathy blunted off, right? By scrolling until our eyes go dark, or blunted by numbing, or blunted by compulsions, right? Brene Brown says, when you numb out, you don't just numb the perhaps difficult emotions, right? Like shame or fear or anger. You numb out empathy, you numb out joy. And so, for those, I envision like this freedom to love. And, my prayer is that there would be this abundance, like overabundance. And I see it in Illumin, right? But our world needs more of it, an overabundance of these like supercharged men who have this empathy that is that is so alive. Like these unencumbered men who their compulsions that they have are wilting in the light of love. And they are alive, and they have this expansive love, like you said, the Northwestern men awaken to belovedness, right? This expansive love that's alive within them, and it's exploding in every direction. And nobody gets left out. Nobody gets left out. And yeah, and they're shape-shifting, like into their truest characters they were destined to be. Like, you know, like their truest selves. So they're morphing, right? They're letting go of like the old things that don't fit anymore. And so they can arise into who they were, imagined to be. Yeah. And it's my conviction and my prayer that as this happens more and more, that, the watersheds benefit, right? The young women benefit. Yeah, third world countries benefit. Both sides of political divide benefit from this kind of masculinity.
Yeah, beautiful. Matthew, thank you for the time today, for the way that I just see you allow the beauty to kind of come through you. Thank you for all the work you've done in private and in secret to heal yourself.
Yeah, same here, Ned. Love you, brother.
It's such a joy to count you as a friend. So